Thank you very much for having me here. Thank you for the help you gave me in getting me here. Karen, Dan, and I, and many of the other folks in this room have been working together for a long time for progressive social change. Citizen Action is a great organization. Citizen Action here and its affiliates nationally have been holding things together. We have a colleague here from Citizen Action Wisconsin who is working right now on one of the most important political efforts in the country. And it's important to get together and bring together people from all different political networks to understand what we're doing, to reinforce ourselves. And the difference between this network, I think, and most of the groups that I speak with, and I all of a sudden have become popular, and people who used to think I made no sense at all now are anxious to hear what I have to say. The difference is that Citizen Action and the party and a lot of the folks here I know very well personally, you understand the difference between movement politics and just regular old electoral politics or lobbying. There is a big difference, and Dan mentioned transactional. Actually, I wrote an article in The Nation a few years ago about the difference between transactional political work and transformational political work. And the important thing to always bear in mind, transactional political work is easy. What's the best deal I can get on an immigration bill today, given where everyone is? How do I get Kathy Hochul elected now, given where the public opinion is? It's transactional. What can I do given the realities of today? Transformational work is different. And Citizen Action is one of those few groups, unfortunately, too few, that focuses on what is the work I do today to change people's minds so I can get a better deal in 2 years. I can get a better deal in 5 years. I can get a better deal in 20 years. I can change the way people think so that things that are impossible to do right now, but should be possible, like single-payer universal health care, or like the recognition that the equal protection of the law requires every child to have a great school, right? Or getting big money out of the business of controlling policies. Things that you can't do today can be done in the future. That's the transformational work that brings us together, not just to work on one specific issue, but to work on building a movement. And I got to tell you, this is a great time to build a progressive political movement. Because, let's be honest, when it comes to transformational work, the conservatives have beaten us pretty badly over the last 25 years, right? Right? First step is admitting you got a problem. So, you know, let's acknowledge this. People didn't always used to think that, government was always the problem, not the solution. People didn't used to think that all regulations are bad and cutting taxes for rich people produces long-term economic growth. They were sold that by a conservative movement that operated self-consciously as a movement, from Reagan to Gingrich to Bush to this guy now who's amazingly enough named Eric Cantor. I mean, it's always just, really, I don't know. They changed people's minds about how the economy worked, about how our justice system worked, and frankly, they changed people's minds about human nature. And it's a great time for Citizen Action to join in what I think is an emerging national effort to develop a transformational counter movement. And I'm confident that you're the people who are going to do this because when you're a candidate, I just finished running for statewide office. When you're a candidate, you're kind of like in a bubble, right? You're dimly aware of what's going on in the outside world. I'm not sure who won the World Series last year. It's like you just don't know. So in the fall of '09, I sort of checked out and I just started moving around the state and running for office. And I've just come out of the bubble in, last December, really, and started to look around, and so I have a kind of a fresh perspective. And when I went into the bubble in the fall of '09, we had this great visionary president we had elected. We had big majorities in the House and Senate, and we're thinking, wow, we're going to get to do a lot of great stuff. And not only that, but the guys on the other side, their economic theories had been proven, as they were in 1929, to be a catastrophe, right? Right? This supply side stuff, the things that they say, oh no, we cut lots of regulations that'll unleash all of the engines of growth and everyone will be wealthy. It was demonstrated to be false. So I came back out of the bubble in December of last year and said, well, okay, what happened? And I have 3 observations that I want to share with you. And all with the purpose of explaining to you my very deep belief that we are on the verge of the next great progressive political movement in American history, and that you are the people who are going to be building that movement. Point one, stop blaming the president. All right, now this is very important because, you know, Democrats and liberals tend to, you elect people and then you go home, right? You elect people, say, okay, they solve the problem. The conservatives elect people and they never go home, right? They camp on the lawns in Washington. They never go home. They are relentlessly pushing their leaders all the time. Leaders can accomplish nothing without a movement to support them, right? You think, people say, oh, why didn't we were supposed to get a second New Deal? You think we would have gotten the first New Deal if it hadn't been for the movement pushing Roosevelt? No! It's up to us to build the movement to support a president to do the right thing, to support governors, mayors, attorneys general to do the right thing. The first iron rule of politics, and I say this as an elected official, we get from our elected officials what we make them give us. Build a movement. Stop blaming the president. Point one. No movement, no second New Deal. Point two. To do transformational politics, we have to dig down deep. Deeper than is comfortable for most people, because ultimately this is not just a battle over what we do. It's a battle over what we are. The conservatives have convinced people that it is in our nature to be scared of each other, that greed is the only way that people function. They've convinced us that there's this sort of grim Hobbesian view of society that is the only true way to look at things, and that anyone else is just a soft-headed liberal kind of idealist, and you're really not being realistic. So Jared Bernstein is one of my heroes, great economist, wrote this wonderful book called All Together Now, where he explains that all the differences between conservative economic policy and progressive economic policy can be broken down by two visions of human nature, which he describes as wit and yo-yo. The conservatives tell you human nature is you're on your own, yo-yo. That's it. This is the way life is. That's what explains all their economic policies. Everyone for themselves, and as soon as you leave the room, everyone else is out for themselves, so you better get it before they get yours, right? Progressive economic policies is defined by WIT, which stands for we're in this together. Karen mentioned that earlier. This is not just a message. This is not just a phrase. This is an understanding of what we are. I am convinced that as we proceed to build the next progressive political movement, we are going to have to reaffirm our belief in and our experience of our connection with each other. Now, Dan mentioned that the reasons we do this are, you know, we want to accomplish some things, we want to make people's lives better, but it's also the people we work with. Those are kind of the same thing at a certain level, right? We act based on our own self-interest, but my self-interest is in having everyone else do well. My self-interest is having every child have a good education, not just my child, because a country where every kid has a good education will always do better than a country where only a few kids have a good education. At our core, the conservatives tell people you should be scared of people who are different than you. Everyone is selfish. We use we call it the 3 S's. The conservatives preach that we are all separate, selfish, and scared. That is human nature. That is when you turn out the light and you're alone with yourself. That's what you are. Our counter movement has to reject and repudiate the idea that that's what human beings are. We are better than that. We are able to experience connection, compassion, courage. Those are our 3 C's. And our movement will be based on the fact that science and religion both tell us we're interconnected. Progressive political activists, you know, have all of the, whether you want to look at nuclear physics or quantum mechanics, or you want to just look in the Old Testament or the New Testament, it's all right there. We are not just, in the United States is the living proof of that, and beings that are all out for ourselves. We are out for each other. We have to make it safe to be out for each other. What is the United States about? Would the United States have had the trajectory it had if the truth of the matter was that human beings are basically just separate, selfish, and scared? I respectfully suggest not. When Thomas Jefferson wrote we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. It's a revolutionary statement. And we know that the facts on the ground, as we now say, didn't support that statement when it was written, right? So we know that when he wrote that, slavery was widespread, women couldn't vote or own property, Jews and other non-Christians suffered under all these disability laws, that it wasn't true. But the mission of America, of every generation, is to make it ever more true. And if it's true that human beings are just basically out for themselves, we'd still be back with the God Kings having all the gold and the rest of us being slaves. What is the true evolution that we have experienced? It took until 1865 for them to abolish slavery, but they did it. It took until, I think it was 1848, for a group of women in the great New York town of Seneca Falls to issue a declaration that all men and women are created equal, and decades more to fight for equal rights for women. It took amazing struggles for what was called the workers' rights movement and the farmers' rights movement that eventually became the labor movement, so that people had the right to share in the wealth they created and had some protection from the forces of the market. For us to come to understand the hard way that it's a job of the government to protect us from the violence of the market, just as it's the job of the government to protect us from the violence of war. These things all took struggle, and believe me, the struggles lie ahead, but this is not a history consistent with people being incapable of evolving towards greater connection, compassion, and courage. In fact, we only evolve one way. The backsliding of the last 25 years, it happens every now and then, but ladies and gentlemen, it always stops, and it stops when people like the people in this room just say no. It's easy for me to just say no. Look, I've been Attorney General 5 months. I'm doing okay as an aggressive progressive. People are looking for this. This is not something that is, you don't end your career when you say something as simple as, can we conduct a study of the potential effects before we go hydrofracking around the watershed? Just not actually that kind of, can we maybe, after the earthquake in Japan, do an analysis of like fire safety and seismic risks and things like that before you relicense Indian Point? Right? That's not, this is what passes for radical, right? This is what passes for radical. People are okay with me saying, I'm sorry, there was a lot of misconduct in the run-up to the mortgage-backed securities bubble, the bubble that blew up the market. I'm not giving up the claims of all of you or the rest of the people of the state of New York before we have a full investigation and we have a full airing out of all of the misconduct that took place. So, look, the other area that I've been working on and that I urge you to make a part of our campaign as we go forward is the area of public corruption and making government work well. And I mention this because we have to make a very, very important distinction. As progressives, as people who believe in the public sector as a force for good, we have to be the harshest critics of waste, fraud, and corruption in government. You do not do our cause any favors when you turn a blind eye to people who are engaged in acts of misconduct, okay? So a part of our program has got to be, let's examine everything carefully and hold people accountable in the private sector. We have to do the same thing in the public sector. That's why I've ramped up our public integrity office. That's why I've got public integrity officers in every regional office of the AG's office for the first time. I announced in an upstate city recently that I had a public integrity officer introduce that person. Before I got back to my hotel, and my security guys freaked out because they didn't think people knew where I was staying, there was this big envelope full of documents that had been dropped off by a whistleblower. They were just waiting for someone to report something to. So this is a part of our path as well. We're all connected. We're all in this together, but we got to make our collective enterprises work well. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me close with my favorite example of the reason that I have overwhelming confidence that we are going to win. First of all, because I know who I am, I know what we're like. I know the best of experiences in all of our lives are when we experience connection, whether it's in personal relationships, whether it's in solidarity with people through collective action, whether it's in prayer or meditation or reflection. Your best experiences is always when you tune into that part of yourself that is wit. We are in this together. I am connected to you. And at every stage of American history, we have risen up to that challenge. So let me tell you who I have now put on the wall behind the desk of the Attorney General is a picture of a guy named Charles Hamilton Houston, and he is the example for all lawyers who come to work in my office. He was a very successful African-American lawyer in the 1920s and 30s, and back then, you want to talk about struggles, and people now say, oh God, things are so tough. Back then, the Supreme Court had ruled in Plessy v. Ferguson that segregation was legal, right? The Jim Crow laws were all constitutionally permissible under their doctrine of separate but equal. Separate schools, separate railroad cars, separate bathrooms, separate restaurants, all legal under the Constitution. All interpreted by the Supreme Court to comport with the notion that all men are created equal. How bad is that, right? But that was the law. So Houston did something amazing. He sat down in 1934 and wrote a memo to the NAACP that said, I'm tired of this. Here is a plan that will, how we can end segregation in America, how we can eventually get the Supreme Court to overturn Plessy. Multi-decade plan. And they said, good, we adopt this plan, and they gave him a total budget of $10,000. And he did it. And he did it, and they picked cases strategically to chip away at separate but equal. And they worked their way through political organizing, through consciousness raising, through litigation, through legislation, to the case that became Brown v. Board of Education. And they worked their way through by training the lawyers who would follow him. Robert Carter, William Hastie, and his protege, a young man named Thurgood Marshall, who some of you probably have heard of. Charles Houston wrote this, trained them. The most important thing about Charles Houston is that he knew this would take a long time. He never lived to see the Civil Rights Act of 1964. He never lived to see Plessy overturned in Brown. But he knew what we are. He knew that we incline towards justice. He knew that the mission of America is to make Thomas Jefferson's words ever more true, and that the next generation would rise to that occasion. Now, our generation is called on. And whether it's true equality for our gay and lesbian brothers or sisters, or whether it's a matter of ensuring that the working people of this country earn fair wages, have safe working conditions, and have the right to organize and bargain without fear or intimidation. This is our generation's challenge. And if you think this is hard, think how hard it was to talk to people about we're going to end segregation in 1934. Everyone said, oh, I wish I was in the Civil Rights Movement. Hey, you wish you were in the Civil Rights Movement in 1964. You know, in 1934, when the Ku Klux Klan was at its peak, that wasn't so much fun, right? So it's time to start. If we do our work, ladies and gentlemen, we can get America back on its historic mission towards fulfilling what's the best part of all of our natures. We know who we are, we know what we are, we know what our job is. I assure you, as Houston knew the Supreme Court would overturn Plessy, I know that if we do our work, another court will overturn Citizens United and restore meaning to one person, one vote. But leaders do nothing without a movement. What's the first rule? You get from your elected officials what you make them give you. Make us do our work. Help us do our work. Give tough love to all my brothers and sisters in elective office. And let's build the movement to get back on track. Let's build the movement. Let's do something, you know what, maybe I'm not going to get to see all of this. Maybe I'm not going to get there. But I know that we will get there. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.